You finally find the house you've been searching for. The location is right. The price looks reasonable. Your financing is coming together. The seller seems legitimate. The listing looks professional. The documents look real. You're almost ready to close. Then an email arrives. Updated wire instructions. Please send the remaining funds to this account. Everything looks normal. The name looks familiar. The email looks legitimate. So you send the money. And later, you discover something terrifying. The email wasn't from your closing agent. It wasn't from your attorney. It wasn't from the title or settlement company. It was a criminal. And the money you were supposed to use to buy the property is now sitting in someone else's account. This happened to Sarah. She did everything right. Hired a real estate agent. Got pre-approved for a mortgage. Used a real attorney. And still lost $89,000 in the final 48 hours of closing. Not because she was careless. Because she trusted an email that looked legitimate. And today, I'm going to show you exactly how this happened to Sarah. And the one rule that could have saved her. Because this is what makes property scams so dangerous. They don't always look like scams. Sometimes they look like perfectly normal real estate transactions. A house. A real estate agent. A seller. A mortgage. A title company. A solicitor or conveyancer. A contract. An inspection. A closing date. Everything can look legitimate. Until you discover that one part of the transaction was never what you thought it was. And that's what we're going to uncover today. Because property fraud isn't always about someone handing you a fake document. Sometimes the entire scam is designed around one thing. Getting you to trust the transaction before you've independently verified it. They create an attractive opportunity. They create trust. They create urgency. They reduce your time to investigate. And then they ask for money. So today, we're going to break down how these scams actually work. But more importantly, I'm going to give you a simple brick and brain framework for deciding how much verification a property transaction deserves before you put serious money at risk. It's called the brick and brain 1% rule. And no, this isn't the traditional real estate investing rule you may have heard before. This is a different idea. It's about the cost of discovering a problem before that problem becomes your problem. Let's begin with one of the oldest weapons in the scammer's playbook. Urgency. Imagine you've been searching for a home for months. You finally find one. It's in the neighborhood you want. The price is attractive. Maybe even slightly below comparable properties. You contact the seller or agent. Everything seems normal. Then you hear. There are other offers. Someone else is ready to put down a deposit. If you want it, you need to move quickly. Now notice what just happened. The question in your mind has changed. It was. Is this property legitimate? Now it's. How do I make sure I don't lose this opportunity? That psychological shift is incredibly important. Because when people believe an opportunity is disappearing, they're more likely to skip steps. They may stop comparing properties. They may stop asking difficult questions. They may accept documents without independently checking them. They may rely entirely on the seller's professionals. And they may transfer money before they're completely comfortable with where that money is going. That's why pressure deserves attention. A legitimate seller may want a quick transaction. A legitimate buyer may want to move quickly. But a legitimate transaction should still survive reasonable due diligence. If you're discouraged from independently verifying ownership. If you're pressured to use a particular professional. If you're told there's no time for proper checks. Or you're being asked to transfer a large amount of money immediately. Slow down. The pressure itself is information. And here's the first principle of this entire episode. Never let someone else's urgency determine the speed of your financial decisions. Now let's talk about another powerful tactic. Exclusivity. The property isn't simply available. It's a special opportunity. An off-market deal. A private sale. An investor-only opportunity. A pre-launch development. A below-market offer that's supposedly available for only a few hours. Again, none of those things automatically means fraud. There are legitimate off-market properties. There are genuine private transactions. There are legitimate early-stage property investments. The problem begins when exclusivity is used to prevent scrutiny. Imagine being told, "This price is only available today. Don't tell anyone about the deal. There's no need to involve another attorney. Our lawyer has already checked everything. Just send the deposit and we'll handle the rest." Now the property isn't simply being sold. It's being protected from questions. And that's when you should become more cautious. Because a genuine opportunity should be able to survive reasonable investigation. A genuine seller shouldn't need you to stop asking questions. A legitimate transaction shouldn't become suspicious simply because you want independent advice. This gives us another rule. Don't judge a property deal by how attractive it looks. Judge it by how well it survives investigation. Now let's talk about something even more deceptive. The official facade. A scammer doesn't need to create a document that looks obviously fake. They can create something that looks remarkably professional. A company logo. A real estate website. Professional photographs. A property brochure. A contract. A title document. An invoice. A business address. A phone number. Even a person who appears to be a lawyer, agent, broker, solicitor, conveyancer, or property professional. Everything can look legitimate. And that's precisely the problem. Because humans naturally use appearance as a shortcut for trust. If something looks official, we tend to assume it has been verified. But appearance isn't verification. A website can look legitimate without representing the legitimate owner. An email can look like it came from your closing agent without actually coming from them. A document can contain convincing logos and signatures without proving that the underlying information is genuine. And someone can have access to real property information without having the legal authority to sell the property. So remember this. Don't verify the seller's information through the seller. Verify it through an independent source. If you're given contact information for a title company, solicitor, conveyancer, attorney, broker, or government office, don't automatically assume the contact details supplied in the transaction are genuine. Find the appropriate source independently. Then make contact through information you have independently verified. That's a small distinction. But it can make a huge difference. Now let's get into one of the most important parts of a property transaction. Ownership. You might see a house. You might visit it. You might speak to the person claiming to own it. You might even see documents connected to it. But none of those things, by themselves, answer the most important question. Does this person actually have the legal right to sell this property to you? The system varies by country. Whether you're buying in the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, or Australia, the principle is identical. You need to independently verify three things. Who owns the property? What exactly is being sold? And does the person selling it have the authority to transfer it? Those are three separate questions. And answering only one isn't enough. A property can have liens. It can have easements. It can have restrictions. There can be competing claims. The seller can have an ownership interest but lack the authority to complete the transaction in the way they're proposing. A person can even impersonate the legitimate owner. Which brings us to one of the most disturbing forms of property fraud. Seller impersonation. Imagine you own a house. You don't live there. Maybe it's a rental. Maybe it's a second home. Maybe you've inherited it. Maybe it's simply sitting vacant. A criminal discovers information about the property. Then they create a convincing identity. They communicate with an agent. They provide identification. They answer questions. They may even have enough information about the property to sound like the real owner. The property is listed for sale. A buyer comes along. The transaction begins. And the buyer has no idea that the person on the other side isn't the real owner. This is why meeting the seller isn't enough. A buyer needs confidence in both the identity of the person and their authority to sell. And if something doesn't make sense, stop. Don't allow the desire to complete the transaction to override the need to establish who you're actually dealing with. Now let's talk about another classic. The fake property listing. You find a beautiful home online. The photographs are excellent. The location is perfect. And the price is suspiciously attractive. You contact the person advertising it. They have an explanation. They're relocating. They're overseas. They're selling quickly. They're handling everything remotely. You can't inspect the property yet. But you can reserve it. All you need to do is send a deposit. This is where the scam becomes simple. The property may not even be available. The person advertising it may have no connection to the property at all. And the photographs may have been copied from a legitimate listing. The scammer doesn't need to own the property. They only need you to believe that they do. And once again, the pattern appears. Attractive opportunity. Trust. Urgency. Limited verification. Payment. That's the system. Now let's move into something that can affect much larger transactions. Wire fraud. This is what happened to Sarah. Imagine you're buying a $500,000 home. You've made it through the mortgage process. You've completed the inspection. The paperwork is almost finished. Closing is approaching. Then you receive a message. Please note that our bank details have changed. The email contains your name. It references the property. It knows the closing date. It looks like a normal message from someone involved in your transaction. So you follow the instructions. You send the funds. Later, you discover the account wasn't controlled by the legitimate party. The transaction was compromised. This is exactly what happened to Sarah. The email looked legitimate because it was sent from someone who had real access to her transaction details. But it wasn't from her closing agent. It was from a criminal who had compromised the email system. This is why unexpected payment changes deserve extreme caution. If payment instructions change, don't simply reply to the message. Don't assume the email is legitimate because the conversation has been legitimate until now. Independently contact the relevant professional using verified contact information. Confirm the instructions. Confirm the account. Confirm the amount. And confirm before sending. Because in a major property transaction, one fraudulent message can redirect an enormous amount of money. Now let's talk about another problem. Fake professionals. A scam becomes much more convincing when the criminal doesn't operate alone. Imagine you're introduced to a property professional. They review the documents. They tell you everything looks fine. You relax. But ask yourself, who selected this person? And who are they actually representing? If you're buying a major property, consider using your own appropriately qualified professional. Your own attorney. Your own conveyancer or solicitor. Your own surveyor where necessary. Your own inspector. The exact professionals depend on your location and transaction type. But the principle is universal. The person helping the deal move forward should not be the only person responsible for protecting your interests. Now let's move from existing properties to new developments. Because sometimes the property you're buying doesn't even exist yet. Imagine a developer launches an incredible new residential community. The website looks beautiful. The architectural renders look impressive. There are modern homes, landscaping, security, clubhouses, swimming pools, retail spaces. Everything looks like a finished neighborhood. Except it isn't. It's a rendering. And that creates another question. What exactly are you buying today? Who owns the land? Does the developer have the rights required to develop it? What planning or zoning approvals are required? Which approvals have actually been obtained? What permits are necessary? What does your contract actually give you? Where does your deposit go? What happens if construction is delayed? What happens if the development doesn't proceed? A rendering is not a building. A sales brochure is not planning approval. A showroom is not proof of ownership. And an attractive payment plan isn't proof that a project is financially viable. This is where you have to separate the image of the investment from the legal and physical reality of the investment. Now let's talk about price. A low price isn't automatically a scam. People sell properties below market value for legitimate reasons. Maybe they need to relocate. Maybe they're dealing with an estate. Maybe the property needs major repairs. Maybe the seller genuinely wants a quick transaction. The problem comes when an unusually low price is combined with a story designed to stop you from investigating. We need the money today. There are already 5 buyers. You have to decide now. Don't involve anyone else. Now the low price isn't just an opportunity. It's being used as psychological bait. So compare. Look at comparable properties. Understand the local market. Ask why the price is different. And remember, an unusually good price should increase your curiosity, not reduce your caution. Now let's return to the bigger picture. Wire fraud, fake listings, seller impersonation, fake professionals, fraudulent documents, ghost developments, ownership problems, unusually attractive prices. They look like different scams. But underneath them is often the same sequence. First, create an attractive opportunity. Then create trust. Then create urgency. Then reduce independent verification. Then ask for money. That's the pattern you need to remember. Because you don't need to memorize every scam. You need to recognize the system. And that brings us to brick and brain rule number 8. The 1% rule. Before you risk 100% of your money, spend at least 1% verifying what you're actually buying. Here's what that means in practice. Let's say you're considering a $300,000 property. 1% is $3,000. That doesn't mean you should automatically spend exactly $3,000 on due diligence. It isn't a legal requirement. It isn't a universal cost. And some transactions will require much less. Others may require much more. The point is the mindset. If you're willing to risk hundreds of thousands of dollars on an asset, you should be willing to invest a fraction of that amount in appropriate verification. That could mean legal review, title research, a professional inspection, a survey, planning or zoning checks, property record verification, specialist advice, or other appropriate due diligence depending on the transaction. You're not paying simply for more paperwork. You're paying to reduce uncertainty. And if that process reveals a serious problem before the money moves, that could be the best money you ever spent on the transaction. Now let's turn that principle into a practical checklist. Before you commit serious money to a property, ask: who owns it? Can I independently verify that? Who is selling it? Can I independently verify their identity and authority? What exactly am I buying? Can I verify the legal description, title, boundaries, and relevant property records? Are there liens, easements, restrictions, or other issues that could affect the transaction? If it's a development, what planning, zoning, and permitting requirements apply? Which approvals actually exist? Have I physically inspected the property? Have I had the contract reviewed independently? And most importantly, where is my money going? If payment instructions change unexpectedly, stop and verify them through an independent channel. Don't let the final 5 minutes of a transaction undo months of due diligence. Before we get to the closing, there's one question most buyers never ask. And it might be the most important question in this entire episode. This is your brick and brain decision point. Most buyers spend enormous amounts of time calculating the upside. How much will the property appreciate? How much rent could it generate? How much equity could I build? How much could I make when I sell? Those are important questions. But there's another question that deserves equal attention. What happens if I'm wrong? Because if being wrong means losing your down payment, that's serious. If being wrong means losing your entire investment, that's even more serious. And if being wrong means years of legal disputes before you even know whether you actually own what you paid for, then due diligence isn't an inconvenience. It's part of the investment. That's the mindset I want you to take away from this episode. You don't need to become paranoid. You don't need to assume every seller is a criminal. You don't need to walk away from every attractive property. You simply need to make it difficult for someone to rush you past your own verification process. Because one red flag doesn't automatically prove fraud. A below-market price can be legitimate. An off-market deal can be legitimate. A seller can genuinely need a quick closing. A payment account can change for legitimate reasons. But when several warning signs appear together: pressure, secrecy, unusual payment instructions, unverifiable documents, resistance to independent professionals, an unusually low price, a seller whose identity is difficult to establish, a development that can't clearly demonstrate its legal foundation, that's when you stop asking, how do I make this deal happen? And start asking, why is this deal so difficult to verify? That question can change everything. Because you don't need to prove a scam is happening before you walk away. You don't need courtroom evidence. You don't need to convince anyone else. If the transaction doesn't give you enough confidence to risk your money, you can stop. That's not missing an opportunity. That's protecting capital. And here's the biggest lesson. The biggest mistake in real estate isn't always buying the wrong property. Sometimes it's buying a property from the wrong person. So before you ask, is this a good deal? Ask, is this deal real? Before you ask, does this document look official? Ask, can I independently verify it? Before you ask, does this seller seem trustworthy? Ask, can I independently establish who they are and whether they have the authority to sell? And before you ask, where should I send the money? Ask, how can I independently confirm that this payment instruction is legitimate? Because a genuine opportunity can survive due diligence. A genuine seller can survive verification. A genuine property can survive professional scrutiny. A legitimate transaction doesn't need you to stop asking questions. And if someone is trying to make you stop, that's when you should start asking even more. Remember rule number 8. Before you risk 100%, verify what you're buying. Because the cost of due diligence is always lower than the cost of being wrong. If you've ever walked away from a property deal because something didn't add up, tell us what the red flag was in the comments below. Your experience could help someone else spot it. And if you know someone who's about to buy their first property, share this video with them before they sign anything. One conversation today could prevent years of expensive regret. If you found this helpful, like this video, subscribe to Brick and Brain, and turn on notifications so you don't miss out as we continue building the smartest property education library on YouTube. In our next episode, we're tackling title deed traps. How hidden encumbrances and title defects steal your property value. Making sure what you think you own is actually yours. I'm James. And this is Brick and Brain. Building smarter property decisions.